All right. Well, it is almost 7 p.m. Central Time. Everyone, thanks for being here. Just to reiterate, we're not going to do the traditional area study challenge kind of thing. What we're going to do instead tonight is I've looked at 5 things that I would do for a pre-election workup. Now, if you want the general area study stuff, I've done some free videos. I've got the area intelligence workshop that's also available, and that's the big one. And I'll be providing people with a link to check that out. So tonight we're going to focus on your area study, really doing a pre-election workup for your area study. Now, with that, I do have some general things to say about an area study. And that is, everybody's got to do an area study. I think, if you're really into preparedness, if you're concerned about the future, if you're concerned about things going sideways, it doesn't matter if it's the election that's going sideways, if it's a war with China, if it's a nuclear war between NATO and Russia, if it's a stock market crash and a recession and a Great Depression and de-dollarization and hyperinflation, or EMPs or zombie biker groups, or whatever your doomsday scenario is, we've got to do an area study for 2 reasons. We've got to know what we're up against. So what are the threats, hazards, and vulnerabilities that I have? What are the threats, the things that are going to intentionally get me or deliberately get me? What are the hazards? Typically, these are environmental hazards that can still get me, or that I may run into and get got. And then what are my vulnerabilities? Regardless of the scenario or the contingency situation, I'm going to have certain vulnerabilities due to local factors. And once I identify and assess those factors, I'll be able to identify where my vulnerabilities are. That is, where I am susceptible in certain situations. And those 3 things are the things that we actually prepare for. We're actually addressing the risk posed by threats, hazards, and vulnerabilities. So my point is this: if you don't do an area study and you haven't determined what you're up against, whether those are active threats or kind of more passive local hazards like flooding or gas leaks or train derailments and chemical spills, and we haven't assessed our personal vulnerabilities, then we're not preparing for them. And so all these people with 70-pound bug out bags and these multi-million-dollar bug out locations that are 6 hours away and they've got to drive there, if they haven't addressed those risks and they're not preparing for those risks, then they're really not prepared, regardless of how much money and time and effort you have into preparedness. I call these people the least most prepared people. And then after identifying what we're up against, it's not enough just to identify threats. We also have to look at our opportunities. What do I have to work with? I look at my area as a group of people. Like, I look at my neighborhood as individuals who can be developed into assets. And so the second part of this is not just threats, hazards, and vulnerabilities. It is assets, resources, and opportunities. So what are our assets? Who already lives in my neighborhood or in my community who has skills? Maybe they're a global war on terror veteran. Maybe they're a doctor or law enforcement or a firefighter or nurse or a doctor or a brain surgeon or whatever these people are. I think everyone has something to bring to the table. And so in a worst case scenario, ideally, I can link up with my neighbors whom I already know, or not all of them, but some of whom I already know. And we can develop a plan, a neighborhood security plan. We can make sure everyone gets taken care of. And that is why I live where I live, because I can do that where I live. You may not be able to do that where you live, but I really do think that's the goal. I'm a bug-in kind of person. Now, we do have a bug-out place, but if we're bugging out and I'm leaving my library and all my stuff at home, it's got to be really, really bad. Much prefer to bug in. All right, so with that, those are the 6 things that we need to address: threats, hazards, vulnerabilities, assets, resources, opportunities. Assets are the people who live around you, the people who know things or know how to do things or have certain skills, KSA, knowledge, skills, and abilities. Resources, water, fuel, hardware stores, all those are local resources. And then opportunities. Specifically, I'm looking for networking opportunities, opportunities to meet more people, opportunities to gain more influence, and opportunities to build political, social, and economic power. I want opportunities to build my own political power, my own political influence. So there's power and influence. Power is authority. I have the power to tell these people what to do. I'm not really a power guy. I'm an influence guy. I want to influence people who have power to do the right thing or to do things that are going to be advantageous for me in any kind of emergency. I mean, it's not even an emergency scenario. People are making decisions for you about your future right now. And and especially at the local level, if I don't have a way to influence that person, there's no guarantee that person is making decisions for me or for the area that are in my best interest or in my neighborhood or community's best interest. And chances are very good that someone else has placement and access to this individual or this political body, this area of government, and they are leading those decision makers to make decisions that are advantageous to them and maybe disadvantageous to me. I don't want that. So I want to build political power and influence. So that's one opportunity I'm looking for. The next opportunity I'm looking for is ways to build social power. So maybe these are existing groups. Like I go to my local VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and we have our local American Legion. And maybe you have the Kiwanis and the Rotary Club and the Lions and the Bears and the Tigers or whatever local groups you have. Charity, humanitarian, fraternal organizations, whatever. Okay, those are social vehicles that we can use to build social power, social influence. Because when I go into my local VFW or American Legion meeting, most of whom are conservative, and I start talking about local issues that I know that are going to fire them up, it's like, man, I'm pulling back a slingshot and we need to point them in the right direction. To make phone calls to, I'm not really a protest guy, but maybe we organize a protest. Maybe we make some politicians feel a little politically uncomfortable in order to sway them to do the right thing. And then finally, economic opportunities. A really good examples like my local American Legion, I don't know, ages ago. There, right next door, there's like a trailer park. And the American Legion had some very well-heeled people. And they bought that trailer park through the American Legion. And now the American Legion is self-funded. No one pays dues. Like all these cookouts and these charitable things and Toys for Tots and all these other things that American Legion does, they do essentially for free because they run off the profits of the trailer park. And, I was thinking about that and I said, how do we make money? Like, how do we make profits in our own local areas? How do we run local businesses that churn a profit that I can then put back into my community or I can throw at problems? Because money is stored power. Money solves problems. And I don't want to keep having to pay out of my personal pocket, take food off my kids' table to solve a problem. What kind of economic opportunities are there that we can use in order to start solving those problems from the profits generated from this business? There's a really great book called Out of the Mountains. It's by David Kilcole. And in that book, he talks about this gang down in Jamaica. And it was called the Shower Posse. And I forget the gang leader's name. But one of the things he did is, I think it was I think it's Kingston, whatever town they were in. He went and he got a city government contract as the trash collector. And so now this guy's doing illicit activity, okay? He runs a gang, like a legit kind of warlord type of gang. As a matter of fact, he calls himself a Don. I guess it's more like a mafia kind of thing. But he gets a city contract. Now the city is paying him. He is turning around and creating jobs for his gang's family members, okay? Real legit money. And I was thinking, the city, they're going to pay someone to do trash collection. Like that contract is going to get paid whether it's person A, B, or C. And so it got me thinking, well, what local opportunities are there to get paid by city contracts or county contracts that they're going to pay someone anyway. So at any rate, my whole point is those opportunities are political, social, and economic opportunities. I want to network. I want to build power and influence in my local area, because once we do that, then we will be in a position to affect positive outcomes for our future. The more political, social, and economic power I have, the more people I know, the more people I can get riled up, the more people I can agitate, the more people I can point in a direction and throw at a problem, the much better off we are all going to be. One misconception about an area study is that it's just a collection of information. And that is technically true. It is a collection of information. But your area study is a blueprint for action. When I'm going through and doing my area study, I'm looking for, oh, this person, right? I need to meet this person. Okay, great. How do I get to this guy? I don't know him. It'd be weird if I just cold approached him off the street. Who do I know that knows him? How many nodes do I have to go through mine and his network before I get to a mutual contact? Or there's a building. I tell the story. It's small by Texas standards, but we have a small ranch about an hour from where I live right now. And it's out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, really like BFE, Central Texas. And a couple of years, like post-COVID, this was 2021 or 22, I'm driving on one of the back roads around there, and I see this big billboard. And they're putting in a 110 home subdivision out here. I have no idea where enough people to fill 110 homes come from, but they're out there now. And so that's now a huge intelligence gap for me. What kind of subdivision is this? Is this Section 8 housing? People that now live a mile from our ranch. I got 110 households that now live a mile from my ranch. Like, that drastically changes my operating environment. Or are these McMansions and little ranchettes that wealthy people decided they're not going to live in Dallas or Houston or Austin or San Antonio anymore, and they're going to move out to the country? So at any rate, my whole point about this is we do an area study and we look for pieces of information that we can use, or we look for pieces of information that we need to do a little bit more digging in order to determine possible scenarios that we'll encounter. The more we do that, the more we consider those possible scenarios and think through them and prepare for them or make contingency plans for them, the better off we're going to be if the stuff really does hit the fan. I'm not a Mad Max guy. Not really. I don't think we're going to be fighting off zombie cannibalistic San Franciscan biker gangs. Not me personally, but I do think things can get quite bad. I don't know. We'll keep our fingers crossed. As always, if you have questions or comments, go ahead and put them into the chat. We're going to move on here and talk about the levels of intelligence and operations. So really, there's 3 levels we're dealing with here. From the highest level, that's our strategic level. Okay, this is big picture level, like global, or pretty much global in focus. The strategic level, we're really looking at 2 things. So number 1, there is geographical, so the global in focus. When we talk about a war with China, it is a strategic issue. It's a strategic problem. Why? Because it's literally halfway around the world. We can also talk about strategic in terms of time. If 2027 does end up being the year that we go to war with China, that's 2 years away. That's a long time. That's a strategic time frame. Basically, like 3 to 6 months out, you start getting into the strategic time frame, as opposed to 5 minutes from now, which is a tactical time frame. All right, so we have this big strategic or global level, and then we move one step down, and we look at the operational level. Now, for us, that's going to be in our region or maybe our state. And so that's the regional level. Like when I talk about Central Texas or Texas, that's a regional level. And then we get even further down, and we're talking about right out my doorstep, down my road, in my subdivision, around my community. That's my tactical level. You have your one town over, that's that guy's tactical level. My town, that's my tactical level. But we start to put together all these tactical levels from everyone's towns, and we get to the regional or operational level. And then we put all these regional operational levels, and we get the national level. We put all these national levels up, and we get the big picture strategic or global level. I hope that makes sense. Now, the way to think about this, let me just tell you about the Army version of this. It's not just the Army, it's the military version of this. Everyone wants to win the war. Okay, that's the big strategic aim, is what war do we fight and how do we win it? And in order to do that, we need to win battles. We need to win tactical engagements at the local level. When we win a string of battles, that's called a campaign. A military campaign is a string of battles and tactical engagements. And when we win the string of battles, we win campaigns. And then when we win a string of campaigns, we can win the war, which is the strategic level. So all of this starts with the tactical level. We have to win at the tactical level if we want to win at the big picture strategic. All right, I hope that makes sense to everyone. If not, ask a question. So what we really need to be analyzing is what's called our operational environment. And we'll just go ahead, joint publication 1-02 says, your operational environment is, quote, a composite of the conditions, circumstances, and influences that affect the employment of capabilities and bear on the decisions of the commander. Snooze fest. Plain speak, your operational environment is all the things in your area that have a direct or indirect effect on you and your mission. So I'm in Central Texas. Is Los Angeles, California, my operational environment? No. Is New York City, is Florida, no. None of those are my operational environment. My neighborhood, my town, my county, that is my operational environment. So this is what we have to understand and analyze. The best way to understand and analyze your operational environment is through an area study. Now, specifically, at my tactical level, I want to start off by identifying my area of operations. Okay, so for me, that's my home or my subdivision. Wherever I'm going to be or wherever I'm going to go, either day to day or during an emergency. So this is my old neighborhood in Austin. And if we had an EMP or a cyber attack or whatever, insert your Mad Max scenario here, this is my AO. This is where I'm going to be. I'm not going to be dropping the kids off at school. I'm not going to be driving to work anymore. This is it. So the first thing we really need to do is identify your area of operations. Where are you going to be? Now, in a less than worst case scenario, maybe we do go to the grocery store. Maybe we go to church on Sunday. Maybe we go to meetings at a church. Maybe we go down to City Hall, or we go to a community center where people are congregating and sharing information. Maybe we go to the farmer's market. Maybe we go wherever. If we go there, that's your operational environment. That is your area of operations. And so that's the area that you need to understand. Again, a much larger presentation that we can talk about later. But just for now, determine what your area of operations is for any given scenario contingency. Next, outside of that, we have your area of interest. And that is the area that you are interested in. So whatever happens in your area of operations is going to directly affect you. Like if there's a guy with a gun in my neighborhood, yeah, that's a direct effect on me. But if there's a guy, out in the county, I may have indirect effects, but he's not going to directly affect me, not unless he comes to my AO. So the question I ask myself is, all right, let's zoom out just a little bit outside of our area of operations and look at our area of interest, the area that surrounds our AO. And what are the things that are going to impact me? What am I interested in? Or what outside my AO could affect me in some way? Or what locations or areas do I want to monitor because something important may happen there? Now, on this map here, we'll just go from the top part there. That's the Southwest Parkway, that road that curves up on the northeast corner of that map. That's a high-speed avenue of approach. That's a main artery for that area of Southwest Austin. And so I am interested in whoever's turning off that main artery into my neighborhood, because it's a mile, less than a mile from that turnoff, you can be in my neighborhood. So that is an area of interest to me. That is something that I would like to have information on. I'll just go clockwise here. In the southeast corner, there's that little circle down there. That's a trailer park. I'm not saying they're bad people. Just I know some bad stuff happens down there. It's a relatively high crime area. And so I'm interested in what's happening down there. There's some government and industrial buildings there just to the south of my AO, and then we clockwise come all the way up to the northwest portion there. That's an apartment complex. 1,400 people-ish maybe live up there. That's a lot of people. That's the highest density of, just in terms of immediate access to me. That is an area of interest to me. I'm interested in what's happening there. Now, your area of interest can be, legitimately as big as you make it. There are some areas in this vicinity that I can include in my area of interest. But for me, I just said, look, I've got limited collection capacity. I need to prioritize what I'm most interested in. And those were the things that I'm most interested in. Here's a question. Mike, do you care about these arteries into your AO just from an informational standpoint, from an access denial or a control standpoint? That's a good question. It depends what my mission is. If I'm trying to keep out the zombie apocalyptic horde pouring out of Austin like locusts into my area, yeah, I might think about area denial. So it really depends what your mission is. If I'm just trying to make it through the hurricane or the flooding that results from a hurricane or whatever, then I'm maybe not as concerned about access denial. Good question. Depends on the mission. Everything's mission dependent. All right, now I have 6 layers of the operational environment. There are many like this. These are my 6 layers. These are things that when I started writing the Area Intelligence Handbook, I just said, these are the 6 layers that I'm most interested in. These are the 6 layers that we've got to nail. Number 1 is physical terrain and weather. So hills, mountains, lakes, valleys, the terrain features that could impact me, like a river. A river can flood. Okay, that's a significant feature of my physical terrain. Also, weather. People tend to skip over weather, but I want to get weather and climate data. And that includes sunrise and sunset. People ask me, Mike, should I get night vision? And my buddy Homer says this, and it's a really good answer. He says, you know what? On average, it's low light or no light, low visibility for roughly 12 hours a day on average for 365 days a year. I don't know. Do you want to see in the dark for 50% of the day or 50% of every 24-hour cycle? Yeah, I do. Okay, get night vision. So periods of nautical twilight, sunrise, sunset, average precipitation, all that kinds of stuff I would put in climate and weather data. Next is the human terrain. So who lives near me, not just demographics, not just sex and age and race and all that stuff, although that can be very important. But what are people's political beliefs or ideological beliefs? What are their thoughts and opinions? What do they think about government? What do they think about law enforcement? What do they think about Trump? What do they think about me? All those are aspects of, and what's their culture and their language. Like the county I live in now, 20% Spanish speaking at home. That is a significant feature of my county. It's a significant feature of my operational environment. It would behoove me to regain fluency in Spanish. That's part of my human terrain. Next is critical infrastructure. This is whatever keeps your world spinning. Your grocery stores, your super Walmart, your Targets, your gas stations, your Ace Hardwares, your schools, your hospitals, your fuel depots, whatever you've got in your area that you depend on, that's part of your critical infrastructure. And then of course I got power plants and water utilities, sewer systems, natural gas pipelines, or whatever you got in your area. It's super important to understand, especially when it comes to considering what can break. I tell people you got to do an area study, because if you do your area study, you're going to figure out what can break, and once you figure out what can break, you can prepare for it. If you haven't figured out what in your area can break and you haven't looked at the effects, then you're not prepared for it. So I think that's another reason why we have to examine our local critical infrastructure. Next is politics and governance. So who are the people making decisions for you? Both elected and unelected officials. There's a lot of elected officials that have power and authority, like your mayor, your city council, your county commission, your whoever gets elected, your dog catcher, if he gets elected in your area. But then there's also informal power centers, or unelected people. Maybe in your county, nothing happens in your county until it crosses Karen's desk, because Karen's worked for the county. She's the county clerk. She's been there for 40 years. She knows everybody, knows everything. And, I don't know. Somehow Karen has worked herself into this position. That's just an example off the top of my head of an informal power center. Maybe your Chamber of Commerce. When I went to the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, we called it the machine. I don't know if it's an actual mafia machine, but basically nobody got elected in Tuscaloosa unless they were part of the machine, and they were machine candidates. And it's like a real cabal of people, and the machine controlled who got elected to the student body president, who became the chair or the president of the Greek system there. I was in a fraternity. And so that's another part of our political and government landscape is informal power. So these people aren't elected. This is like the deep state of the city of Tuscaloosa, basically. Next is safety, security, and defense. So this includes law enforcement. This includes military. And this also includes private security. So if you've got rent-a-cops, or you've got some high-level executive protection agency in your area, safety, security, and defense, we've got to know about these people, because these are the people who enforce the laws made by the people who decide the laws. And then finally, we've got economics and finance. So what are the economic drivers in your area? Coming into, maybe there's going to be a recession next year. Maybe we're already in a recession. How did my area fare during the last recession? What were the major challenges? What happened with property crime? What happened? Several years ago, I went out to West Virginia for a thing, and you just talk about an economically depressed area. They shut down all these coal mines. They shut down the logging industry. This was under the president who shall not be named. And they just eviscerated these areas' economies. And there's just economic blight. So do you have a local economy that's dependent on a certain political party being in power? Do you have industry in your area that is subject to the whims of whoever gets into office or whoever becomes president? So those are just some of the things I would consider, like major employers. Who's your county's major employers? Also we talk about finance and economic power. What banks and what financial institutions do you have in your area? If we do get into another banking crisis in the next financial crisis, are there local banks that are going to go under because they have too much money invested in commercial real estate, and the CRE market is tanking, and all these shopping malls are not filled anymore because people aren't shopping there, and they're just not nice places anymore. People stop going there. Now all of a sudden you have this multi-million, these banks are on the hook for many millions of dollars. So at any rate, I would be looking at local economic and financial issues as well. By the way, there's a question that says, how can we get the Area Intelligence Handbook? You can go to my store, grayzonestore.com. It's not on Amazon because I don't want to give Jeff Bezos any money. Not until he starts donating to Trump, at least. Grayzonestore.com. Gray with an A. All right, so for tonight, the remaining, say 15 minutes or so, then we'll do 15 minutes of Q&A. We're looking at a pre-election workup here. These are the 5 things that I'm looking at, and I would recommend you look at for doing a pre-election workup. If you're really concerned about the election going sideways and any kind of civil unrest or local political fallout, here are the 5 things. mapping the political landscape, the social landscape, the information landscape, mapping the key terrain, and then identifying local assets and building your network. We're going to start with the political landscape. There's two websites I really like. We're going to start with City Data, which is this image right here. You can look up your city, you can look up your county, and there's just all sorts of data on there. It's literally data for cities. But if you scroll down to the map, you can zoom in on your area, and this is the 2020 presidential election results. And you can see how white Austin is. So, you know, these areas are getting like, they're 25% Trump. And you go out into the country, you know, it's like a little bit better. There's another website, New York Times. If you go to the 2020 election map, if you just Google it, it's the top search result. And you'll find a map that says an extremely detailed map of the 2020 election. So I just dropped in my zip code and, you know, all right, here's Austin. Used to be a lot redder. And now even the blue is expanding out into Williamson County, and this whole San Antonio to Austin corridor is turning blue. Those are just two things, just to get a basic overlay of my county. Two great resources. All right. Also, I would look up all your politicians, especially the prominent politicians, like your mayor and your city council, your county commission. Identify them by name. We got to figure out who these people are, how they vote, what they believe. That also means you should be going to city hall meetings. You should be going to your county commissioner meetings or whatever county government meetings you have. Also, where I live, budgets is a highly contentious issue. There's been this weird thing going on with Texas property tax. And our county commission has been extremely hostile to lowering property taxes. I mean, they have this massive budget surplus, and they just want more money from us. And they introduce all these new taxes and stuff all the time. It's ridiculous. So we're trying to stop it. Next is, once I identified all these governmental bodies and offices and whatever you have, we've got to look at official information sources. So that includes looking up these government websites. How do they put out information? Do they have like blogs or a public affairs office or a public information office? Or how do they, if they're going to publish some information, some official information, how do they do it? Some of these places may have an email list. You should get on that. Some may have text, SMS lists. Okay, maybe you should get on that as well to get the official email. Because when there is an emergency, I want to pay attention to whatever official information they're putting out. Also, I'll look up social media accounts for all your local people, Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, if they're on some other social media account, look them up. Anywhere they might be putting out information. The great thing about social media is we can automate collection. I don't have to sit there in front of Twitter and keep reloading it. I use an automation tool. And I get a roll up every day of whatever they post. And not only whatever they post, but whatever they delete later that's no longer on Twitter, it's still been snapshotted. What automation tool do you use for social media? I use Maltego, Maltego. I think it's the best one out there. All right, next, I'm also going to be looking at the social landscape. So I'm going to be looking at political action committees, local donor class. You can go to a website like opensecrets.org and look up people's campaign contributions, if they've made hard money campaign contributions. I can also look it up by employer. So if I want to know XYZ Corp, they're my county's largest employer. I'm going to go look up XYZ Corp, whoever donated money to politicians and listed XYZ Corp as their employer. They have some intelligence value for us, especially when it comes to networking or identifying the people who are giving money to these NGOs or to these political action committees doing the bad things in our areas. I want to keep the good stuff in, keep the bad stuff out, and identifying the financiers of all these insane efforts. It's got to be pretty high up. If you want to stop it, it's got to be pretty high up. Identifying those people has got to be pretty high up on your priority list. Also, look up like Shelby County GOP or Shelby County Democrats, your Democratic Socialists of America, the PSL's Party for Socialism and Liberation. They're a much smaller party, but I have noticed they've kind of been popping up. And then, you've also got the communist political parties. And actually there's CPUSA, there's Revolutionary Communists, RevCom, and then there's this new thing they launched back in April called Revolutionary Communists of America, or RCA. And they've been all talking about building grassroots power. They said, look, we've been pursuing electoral politics for a long time. We're basically getting no results. Like there's no CPA or there's no CPUSA candidates really to speak of. So what do? Well, we've got to start getting into local grassroots. We've got to start infiltrating the Democrat Party and finding all these socialists and trying to convert them to join us over at RCA, RevCom, CPUSA. That's something that I would be keeping an eye out for. If you have a college or university campus, you almost certainly have faculty members who are pushing this stuff. I didn't list that on here, but that's another avenue that you should pursue. JC, I'll get to your question here in just a second. And then obviously activists and social justice groups as well. Social media. Find their social media accounts. You look at all these, you look at political parties, they have email lists, they have text, SMS lists, they have social media accounts because that's how they push information out. That's how they reach their followers. We need to find those social media accounts and monitor them if we want to understand what's next. If they're forming a protest, if Trump wins, or whoever wins, and they're going to say, we're going to launch a protest. They're going to put that stuff out via social media. So we got to go find their Instagram and Twitter and Facebook accounts and whoever else these people are. And by the way, one of the things we do here, we track all these protests and the occasional riot. And, this is stuff you expect in Seattle and Portland, but, this stuff is in like Nashville and these like smaller, a little more conservative cities as well. And so Rally for the Valley, they're rallying, protesting TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority in Nashville. All right, next we need to look at the information landscape. So local media outlets, TV, radio, newspapers. I would also say alternative newspapers. Like if you have a college or university, not only will you probably have a college paper, but you may have these alternative publications or zines, which is short for magazine. Especially these left-wing, the far-left groups, they have these zines. And you go to these little anarchist book fairs, like I went to a couple in Houston, and they have all these little different pamphlets and little pieces of paper lined up on these tables that you can buy. Quite interesting. You should go to one. If your area has an anarchist book fair, you should march on down there and check it out. And when I say anarchist, I'm not talking about your Edward Abbey homesteading hippie. I'm talking really about the anarcho-communists. Also, any other online sources of local information, look those up in your area. They're producing information. This is something that we need to be monitoring if we want to be ready for post-election fallout, protests, civil unrest, riots, whatever else is going to happen. Also, there's lots of blogs and forums at your state and maybe even your local level. Reddit, I think I would be surprised if major cities did not have some Reddit forums. Craigslist, I've also seen some political stuff coming on Craigslist. Also social media accounts as well. Local social media accounts, especially for political and social justice groups. Again, if whatever they're organizing, this social media is how they recruit. Well, first of all, it's how they propagandize. It's how they reach people. It's how they recruit. It's how they publicize these campaigns. It's how they publicize protests or direct action campaigns or autonomous action campaigns. This is how they push out information. We got to go find this information and monitor it at the local level. Also, we need to be looking at key terrain or key locations. So your political party headquarters, for instance, there could be protests there. If Trump wins, there may be protests outside the GOP headquarters. there might be firebombs outside these GOP headquarters. Also historical protest locations, so that may be City Hall, it's certain parks, against certain statues. Again, county Republican headquarters, probably pretty close to ground zero. I would also identify polling stations just for situational awareness on where they are. Again, I hope nothing gets disrupted. I mean, frankly, I wouldn't bet on it, not this election cycle. Also, bookstores and coffee shops. There are a lot of these places that are kind of like hangouts for far left groups, especially like Monkey Wrench Books in Austin. That was one of the big ones. So, drive around your area, go to these little kind of smaller independent bookstores or independent coffee shops. I've not seen a single like right-wing bookstore, but I go into a small independent mom and pop bookstore, and it's just like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and like queer feminist theory. And they've got a whole bookshelf dedicated to queer feminist theory. I just think, who in the world is buying this stuff? But they've got it. So go in there, and sometimes they'll have like a bulletin board. Go over to the bulletin board, snap a picture of it, or just read stuff that's up there. Because again, that's another way how they push out information. Check for zines or newspapers or little pamphlets that they may have that may be free, and just take one. And so, literally just get on, it used to be Yellow Pages, get on Google Maps or whatever kind of open source mapping system you use, and just look up independent bookstores or used bookstores, and then look up all your coffee shops, and then just take an afternoon and drive to all those places and check them out. Any kind of alternative spaces, these are typically, one thing I've noticed for these far left groups especially, is they're actually getting their own, it's not really like office space. It's like their own hangout space. And they'll invite speakers. I used to live in a city, and they would have like slam poetry night one night, and then they would have like some communist meeting the very next night. So identify these places and, just say, check them out. Because again, if there's anything that pops off post-election, I doubt we see a 2020 replay unless we have a recession and unless there's stimulus and unless we repeat all the conditions that we had in 2020. Obviously, if Trump wins, this may be back on the menu, boys. I doubt we see anything on the level of 2020. I could be wrong. But if 2020 Part 2 Electric Boogaloo does pop off, these are going to be the ground zero places. These are going to be the places where people are gathering and organizing and recruiting and facilitating whatever happens. All right, then we get to local assets. Meetup.com, one of the first things I did when I moved to Austin, I got on meetup.com, and I started seeing all these Republican and Trump meetups, and I started going to them. And pretty soon, I'm meeting like 5 or 6 guys, and there's like 20 guys, and there's like 50 dudes, all Trump supporters, and we're going out. And, I was still a single man back then. So, we go down to 6th Street and, go to bars and stuff and hang out and then have these Trump meetups. It was a really fun time. You really had to be there. I mean, it was just phenomenal time. 2016, what a year. But meetup.com is one place where I started linking up with local like-minded people. Some other local assets you may think about is doing an FCC search for local ham radio operators. We may not be able to determine their ideological bent, but just knowing they're out there, maybe one lives in your neighborhood. I mentioned opensecrets.org. We can go to individual donor lookup and look up people and other information. County political groups, so Crossing Party Lines, Austin, Texas. Voluntarists of Austin. Volunteering with your county CERT program, that's the Community Emergency Response Team. It's going to give you a lot of access to information that you would otherwise not have. And they also have lots of really good free training. CERT. Check it out. Farmers markets and co-ops. I go almost every Saturday. I go to my local farmers market. And it's funny because these people see your faces, and I go there and I spend money, and I've almost completely stopped going to the grocery store. And I'm just spending all my grocery money down at the farmer's market, buying actual real food. And if they're not busy, just talk to them, chat them up, just ask them some general questions about, their business. Ask them. There's a lot of them produce different stuff by the season. And so just ask them. It is kind of fall. So ask them, what do they have coming up for fall? Oh, what do they do during the winter? What do you sell? And just start building some rapport with these people. I was talking to one guy, and I even forget how we got on this topic, but we were talking about how nice it was in Texas in the spring and the fall, and how good the people are. And he said, yeah, Texas would be a great place to build a free country. And I thought, I probably want to get to know this dude. So look for opportunities to make friends. Just thinking about a Mad Max scenario, I want to know the people who grow extra food. Like, I want to know the people who produce the stuff that I need to live, that my family needs to live. I would like to know these people. So I think this is another great place to make friends. Local charity groups, you go and volunteer your time. You're going to meet a lot of people. And not only that, you're going to maybe even build a reputation for being an okay guy, trying to help people. Fraternal and social organizations, and of course, church. I think church is probably like the number one place to build your local network, if that suits you. All right, so just in terms of actionable intelligence, we broadly covered 5 areas tonight. So understanding the local political landscape, understanding the local social landscape and the information landscape, identifying your key terrain in your area, and then finally looking for local assets and networking opportunities. And guys, if you do these 5 things, you will be much better prepared, just informationally, just having situational awareness. Not only will you have situational awareness, but we can take that and develop that into situational understanding, which is the next past essay, past situational awareness is situational understanding. And we can actually start understanding our local operational environment to the level that we can wield some influence, and we can play an active role in determining positive outcomes for my family, for my neighborhood, for my community. That's where we want to get to. I don't want to be at the whim of someone else who has more power or influence than me. People talk about being a warlord. Be a community leader, or link up with a community leader, build a community, build political, social, and economic power. Because regardless of who wins in November, regardless of when and where we go to war with China or with Russia, regardless of anything happening, you've got to have political, social, and economic power to the local level. Your life, your quality of life is going to increase so much with the more political, social, and economic power you have, because you are going to be in a position to drive local outcomes. One of my big things has been figuring out how to maintain a first world zone and a third world descent. How do I keep my neighborhood functioning? How do I keep it nice and safe? I don't have to fear for, my wife or kids or whatever. How can I do that? It starts with political, social, and economic power. If you don't have it, you better be a very good warlord. And actually, warlords, they need political, social, and economic power too anyway. All right, with that, I think we do have a few more minutes for questions. I'd be happy to answer them. Recommendations for HOA. Yeah, I got a little letter from my HOA because I didn't pick up my garbage can on the day that the trash pickup came. And they even took a picture of the thing and sent it to me, as if they needed a proof of this grave sin that I had committed. I don't know. My first instinct is probably not what I would recommend anyone do. I think HOAs are a double-edged sword. They can be Karens about a garbage can. But at the same time, I don't have rappers and college students running down home values in my area either. Okay, yeah, JC had a follow-up question about being engaged in politics can you elaborate on how you'd be a bull in a china shop in this context, as some others have mentioned? The norm tends to be remaining apolitical, especially in public safety. That doesn't work. I would like to shift that and induce change. Conservatism hasn't conserved. Well, JC, I would just say this. You've got to have political support, which means you've got to have social support. So the larger your political base and the more active, the larger your social base and the more active your social base becomes in terms of writing letters to the editor and making phone calls and doing all the things that the left is very good at, making repeated phone calls and sending in letters and poster campaigns and all this other stuff that they do. I think everyone would be surprised what you can get accomplished with enough political support. So unfortunately, this all comes back to political support. How do I get the locals to support me in what I'm doing in my mission? And that takes a lot of inform and influence. It's probably not for everybody. It's definitely not for everybody. But if you want to be a bull in a china shop, one thing you need to do is you need to create a political group and concerned citizens of Shelby County or wherever you live, and start recruiting and hold political meetings and talk about the political and social issues and economic issues in your area. And you have to get people agitated. You've got to get people mad. Unless you steal an election, joy does not win an election. Anger and hatred win elections. People who are angry and they want to vote the bastards out. That's what changes election outcomes, unless you steal elections. And then joy can win. So you've got to get people agitated. That you really need social power. If you want to build political power, you've got to have it backed by social power. That's why the left, when they get in, what do? They start giving money to their patrons. Why? Now their patrons have a vested interest in maintaining and building social power so that they can keep voting the political people in, so you can grow your political power and then keep growing social power. It's a self-licking ice cream cone. The left is adept at doing this stuff. Do you see the upcoming election as being more low intensity than the last election? I think it's lower intensity. You look back to 2015, 2016, and there were street fights. I mean, literally fist fights in the street, people bashing each other with shields and throwing fireworks and incendiary devices at each other. We don't have any of that. I mean, we got the pro-Palestine people. But nothing on the order of 2016. So this is much lower intensity environment than 2020 and 2016. A huge majority of my neighbors are leftists. Any ideas on how to find common ground? I don't know, man. I think to find common ground, both parties have to be seeking common ground, and that's just something that we're not doing anymore. Yeah, Brian makes a good point on soft power and hard power. He says soft power isn't something that you can buy off the shelf. It takes work over time. Is there a trigger when things can go south? Would it be the eve of the election or the next day when results are starting to be announced? Yeah, I think it's post-election day. Or on election day, we live in a litigious society. This is probably going to be the worst election we've ever had. Post-election, when the lawsuits start happening, and we've heard Republicans and Democrats, these big political machines, have been deploying hundreds of attorneys all across the country. They've already been filing these legal complaints. They've already been doing the paperwork. They literally just have to give it to a judge, and then the fun begins. So I think the real trigger, it depends what the trigger's for. But yeah, it's probably going to be weeks before the president is determined. And I do think we are in a scenario where a president will be determined, not elected by voters. Would state lines close in martial law? I was watching a video today with Neil Howe, the guy that wrote The Fourth Turning, and his most recent book, The Fourth Turning, is here, which was good. He says Republicans are the Revolutionary Party. Or actually, I'm sorry, that was Peter Turchin. Yeah, Neil Howe, I don't know. I kind of think he says like conservatives losing the majority, or losing kind of the dominant part of society. There's a couple of academics who say that's a real threat. And maybe they have a point. And one of the things he talked about is a scenario in which a state says, well, we don't like who's president, and so we're not going to follow any of these laws. And they have this nullification agenda, and they're trying to nullify all these federal laws. And they say, well, if it's federal law and we don't like it, it's not going to be enforced in our state. And this is him talking about this. And then he says, well, the president cannot appear to be weak. So the president starts talking about sending in the National Guard to this state to force this state to cooperate with federal law. And he actually brings this up. And then he says, well, what happens when the state closes its border and they don't allow federal law enforcement? They don't allow any National Guard or whatever to be mobilized and to come in. And then he said, yeah, you have this recipe for a civil war, essentially. So would state lines close in martial law? I don't know. Depends on the state, but maybe. What's your red line? I don't know. TBD, I guess, to be determined. I haven't gotten there yet, so I don't know. What's up, Yuppie? How is it coming on the S2 shop development? Hey, let me know if you're going to be in Austin at the end of this month. I'm teaching a 3-day. It's my last course of the year in Austin, the 3-day TAC Intel course. So S2 shop development, that is something that I'm still working on here with the early warning network, developing kind of, I call them integrators. Really, we're trying to identify and kind of train some people up to help integrate more regional information sharing. Like, it's really easy for Mark and Robert and Jared and I and some of our other part-time people to do national and global stuff. One thing we can't do is your backyard. But if we have enough people in a state or in a region who can produce more local or regional intelligence, we'd like to help facilitate that. So how is that coming? I don't know, man. It's not. I'm trying to work on getting some other stuff set up, but it is on the long list of things to do. If you are local to Austin, or even if you're not local to Austin, you can go to grayzonestore.com. That's where we put all our courses up there, and it is a paid course. So if you'd like to attend, it does cost money, but it's 3 days of the best training you're going to get, especially on intelligence. If you want to know how to manage the flow of information, how to gather information, how to analyze it, and kind of run your own intel shop during an emergency, it's the only course. It's also the best course, but it is a very good course. Grayzonestore.com. That's Gray with an A. How's Max been doing? Yeah, Max is keeping at it. I've been talking to him a couple times a week. We're gonna bring back the Friday warning roundtables. It's probably going to start the first Friday in October, and we're still looking for a manageable time to get the gang back together. But yeah, Max said he'll come back for Friday. Some special guests on as well. And it's just going to be a roundtable discussion on the big important stuff. We're going to talk about intelligence. We're going to talk about threats. We're going to talk about preparedness. Like, what do you do in this situation? And those are going to be on Fridays. And by the way, I know that a lot of subscribers they may peruse the report, but they don't watch the early warning briefing show every day. And so, if you watch one show per week, spend probably an hour with us on the Friday warning roundtable, and that'll be a really good version of all the week's most important events. You spoke about helping Cajun Navy with intel. How's that going? Yeah, man, we need to schedule. After we get done with this, my next thing is scheduling an info session for Cajun Navy Relief and going over what that volunteering looks like. So Cajun Navy Relief, they're the dudes that show up in monster trucks and john boats to pull people off their roofs and rescue people from floodwaters. And they really want our help. They really want the intelligence help. And a lot of it's kind of doing area studies and kind of intel prep work before they go into an area, so they kind of know what they're dealing with, and they get a lay of the land, and they can know what to avoid and what to expect before they get there. So yes, it will probably be the 1st of October before we do that info session. But we will. It's 30 minutes. I'll kind of lay out the game plan for everyone. I'll give you the CAPES brief that I gave them and explain what we want to do. And then at that point, if you do want to help, it's CajunNavyRelief.com, and they have a volunteer button, and you have to go through there is an application process. But when it asks how you want to help, you can just say, Foxco. It's FOXCO, our Fox company. For a while, we're thinking about starting a 501c3 just for intelligence support. So we've done stuff for Cajun Day Relief. We've done some stuff for like counter trafficking, counter human trafficking organizations that like rescue these girls out of these absolutely horrible situations from human trafficking, and just as a just providing intelligence support on a volunteer basis. I'd be happy to stay here a little while longer if there are other questions. If not, this is the end of my presentation. I hope it was helpful. Hope it made you consider some other things that you maybe not have considered. All right. Hey, thanks so much. Everyone have a great rest of your evening. I think I'm going to see most of you in the morning, 8 a.m. Central. Have a great night, and we'll see you then.